and really pleased to welcome you here and to talk to you this afternoon. I've only been in this job for 5 months, and before then I was in the private sector working for a firm that some of you may know because it's a firm with its roots in Europe, a firm called Mazars, originally from France but with partners across Europe. And then before then, as you heard earlier on, I worked for the Audit Commission, which was public audit at local level in the UK. So across all these jobs, I've 32 years working as a public sector auditor. So I'm with my colleagues from the same industry, and really look forward to talking to you about the challenges facing the audit industry this afternoon. Before I talk about it, I'm going to pick out five big challenges, some of which have already been mentioned. But I just wanted to stress that, as you all know, we're in the UK, we're going through a difficult time in our relationship with Europe at the moment, or with the EU in any case. But at the National Audit Office, we are determined to stay in contact with our friends and colleagues across all supreme audit institutions, including obviously all of those in our closest neighbours in Europe. So hopefully we can continue to work together in this way, whatever happens with the institutional arrangements between government and EU. So I said I was going to address 5 challenges. I've tried to pick, because I think these 5 challenges are common to all of our countries and all of our audit agencies. Some of them will be more or less important depending on national circumstances, but I think they're all relevant. So hopefully what I'm going to talk about is of interest to everybody here, but I'll try and leave some time at the end where you can tell me which important ones that I've forgotten or haven't mentioned. So first one is audit quality, which now I'm conscious that there is a particular UK issue around audit quality. We seem to have had more than our fair share of company failures in the private sector, and auditors have been blamed for not reporting strongly enough in many of those cases. So I'm talking here about businesses that you may have heard of, like Carillion, who did a lot of public sector infrastructure work. There's a cafe chain in the UK called Patisserie Valerie. Despite the name, it has nothing to do with France at all. It's a UK business, but again collapsed with a big hole in its accounts, not picked up by the auditors. So there's a bit of a crisis of confidence with the audit industry in the UK. There are problems in the US as well, and to a lesser extent, I think, in some European countries. But this has turned into a very big debate in the UK, and I think there are issues for all financial auditors in this topic about, are we really challenging the judgments that are being made in accounts that we're auditing? Are we getting robust evidence? And are we being sceptical enough about the assumptions that are being made and the judgments in the accounts? And so whilst those problems haven't affected government accounts in the UK, there are no examples of audit failures, luckily, in the public sector world. This is still an issue that we're taking very seriously in the National Audit Office, and we're working hard on our audit training. We're looking at our audit methodologies, just to make sure that we're not making the same mistakes about too easily accepting judgments made by our clients, and not providing sufficient challenge on what can be quite technical areas around evaluation of fixed assets or pension fund deficits, and so on. So audit quality is a quite important topic for us at the moment, and it may be an area where it would be useful to compare notes between our institutions if it's also something that you're focusing on. Of course, there's a big quality agenda in our value for money work as well, which is a slightly different question. And I know that we cooperate on work on professional standards for value for money work, performance auditing, and we'll obviously continue to do that. And it's another area where we're looking very hard at our methodologies, our training, and our quality control arrangements. So audit quality was the first one I wanted to mention. This one, I didn't know what David Henke was going to talk about, but this is already been well covered, so maybe I don't need to spend so long on this item. All I would say is that in going to meet people across government, across Parliament, and actually a wider group of people with an interest in our work since taking up this job, the most common thing that people have said to me is we need the National Audit Office more than we ever did, partly because of this problem with fake news, people cutting themselves off from reliable sources of news, listening only to opinions they know they already agree with, and being very receptive to things that reinforce prejudices and beliefs and not challenging themselves with actual facts. So there's that problem. And it's also the problem that people in power will prefer that inconvenient facts about how they've used that power are not exposed and are not shared, and that's what David has just been talking about. I think our role is absolutely to stay focused on the evidence, to have no agenda other than value for public money and accountability for public money, and to be demonstrably independent and impartial in the way we approach our work. It's such an important principle. As soon as anyone suspects that there's a reason for our report other than the facts themselves, then the value of our organisation drops away very quickly. And so it's crucially important to us that we are considered to be politically impartial, that we're considered not to have any other agenda that we're bringing to this other than the public interest. And it's something you have to keep on challenging yourself. You know, we're human beings, we have views, we have opinions, and we are subject to the same pressures as everyone else, tend to surround ourselves with people who think in the same kind of way. And so as an organisation, we challenge ourselves very hard to make sure that our recruitment processes, the way we develop our people, really values this independence of thought and this willingness to raise awkward questions and to feel as though you may be out of line with the opinion in the room. But that's really important. If an auditor, it's really important to challenge the orthodoxy and not to allow an organisation like the NAO to suffer from what we call groupthink. You know, so in other words, reinforcing each other's opinions all the time rather than challenging them. So this is as much an issue for us internally as it is externally. We have to really guard against developing a kind of set of opinions that we've stopped challenging over time, and always being open to the fact that what government is doing may actually be a good use of public money. Let's follow it through. Let's be open-minded. And let's judge it on the facts, and I think that is crucial for our value. So I think, as I say, otherwise a lot of already very useful points made about this. So I'm happy to come back to it in questions if you'd like to. But I think all of us are adjusting to a world where there's a lot of things out there, not all of them high quality. Something that we haven't really touched on so far today, which is a big issue for us as we think about the next few years, is our work addressing the long-term threats to public value for money. So all of us know about, the big infrastructure projects. They're obvious sources of risk to value for money. They will always get audit attention, and quite rightly. But what about government's response to climate change, for example? Our government now, after a very long kind of period of policy development and maybe delay, finally has a policy on reaching a net zero carbon position for the country. The target year is 2050, which the science says may be too late, so that target may change, who knows. But at least we have a target, and that means now that everything that government does on this can be judged against its trajectory towards that target. And so this now gives an organisation like the NAO the remit to ask questions about the credibility of government's plans for reaching this objective. As many of you already working in this area will know, this is a very far-reaching topic. So it's not just about decarbonising government's own operations. That on its own would be a very big job, but it pales into insignificance against the job the government has in decarbonising the rest of the economy which it means taking all the gas boilers out of every domestic house and flat in the country, and it has, at the moment, absolutely no idea how it's going to achieve that. It means decarbonising the entire transport network, and persuading people not to fly, and so on and so on and so on. And so this is about human behaviour, this is about private lives, as much as it's about public services. And so as a kind of definition of a long-term challenge to public value for money, it's hard to think of a better one, because spending intelligently in the next few years is going to reduce the scale of the bills we're facing in the years after that. And so we're trying to, first of all, equip ourselves with the knowledge and skills to understand these issues properly, to have sufficient expertise to engage in an intelligent way, and to, what we're really doing is kind of expanding our understanding of what public value for money means in a topic like this, because what we do, I think what is pretty clear is if government's not successful in achieving its target, then the implications for public spending are, hugely significant. So that's a big challenge to us as a profession, I think, and I know that in many countries represented in this room, actually you're slightly further ahead in your development of environmental auditing techniques, and the way in which you're challenging governments on the credibility of their plans. So I think we've got a lot to learn from you on this, and we'll be very keen to do that, and hopefully a lot to learn from each other as we work through this in the coming years. The other long-term issue I've put down here, which again I think affects most of our countries here, slightly different ways in different places, but is demographic change, is the fact that our populations are getting older on average, and the number of people over 75, over 85 is growing very quickly in most developed countries. And that, again, has enormous implications for public spending, and we're already seeing that in this country. So, if you don't increase the NHS budget, the health service budget in the UK by significantly more than inflation, it feels like a cut every year because of the extra demand caused by an ageing population, primarily other reasons as well, but that's the key one. So again, understanding how government is planning to cope with these pressures, what does that mean for the way it organises services, and both of these topics speak to the prevention agenda. So how do you spend public money now that prevents high levels of demand in the future? And governments are notoriously bad at getting prevention decisions right, because the benefits are 15, 20, 30 years away, the costs are now, and a politician is thinking at most 5 years ahead to the next electoral cycle. And it's a very tough challenge for politicians to spend money wisely now, knowing that the people who will benefit from this are their successors decades into the future. So an organisation like the NAO, I think, we do have a role in holding the long term, because we don't have to subject ourselves to elections, luckily, and we can stay focused on long-term value for money. So these two kind of big drivers of costs, I think, they're shaping the way we're thinking about our programs for the next few years. Very interested to hear about any other thoughts you've got on those topics or similar topics from your own organisations. So number 4 challenge, it's been briefly mentioned today, but again, hasn't really been explored yet. So I thought this is worth touching on. The whole economy is being transformed by better use of data, the capability of taking big data sets and using them to transform the way that services are provided, initially in the private sector, but increasingly now in some of the most successful innovations in government over the last 10 years are where they have successfully applied data matching techniques to services that people need to use, and want to see them operate easily, quickly and efficiently. So for example, in this country, getting a passport is a significantly easier job now than 10 years ago, leaving aside the politics of EU exit for a moment, but getting a UK passport You just need to take a picture on your phone. You just need your kind of national insurance number, and you can do it all online, and a passport will arrive in the post pretty quickly. Now that used to involve multiple trips to the photography booth, to the post office, and to the passport office, and it is now a very efficient process. It does rely on government holding data on citizens, which not everybody is completely comfortable with, but it's an example of how data and efficient systems are already starting to change public services. Unfortunately, we have lots of examples where that has not worked well as well, and there are quite a few National Audit Office reports in the last few years dealing with government's poor use of data in cases. We had a really bad episode here where our Home Office was essentially deporting people who couldn't prove that they were UK citizens who had originally emigrated here from the West Indies. It was called the Windrush scandal in the UK. And it was because of the poor quality of data held by the Home Office. And instead of realising the poor quality of that data and acting very cautiously before they used it, the teams in the Home Office were using this data, believing it, and saying, okay, that means you're not entitled to be here, and essentially deporting people who had been in the country for sometimes 30, 40 years, and just didn't happen to have the paperwork from all that time ago. So there's a great example there of the abuse of poor quality data, in contrast to where government has got it right in other areas. So this is striking us as a very important challenge to us, because the way that somebody put it to me recently was public audit bodies need to start thinking about data the same way as you already think about public money. So in other words, there's the same issues here about proper controls over the data, the fraud and abuse on data, whether citizens trust government to use their data properly, and then the value for money questions around service improvement and efficiency, because a lot of these tools will allow more efficient service delivery, but only if they're carefully thought through and implemented well. And I haven't even mentioned artificial intelligence, but once we start getting into public services being delivered by algorithm, then we already can see some of the early issues that that's throwing up, because algorithms are only as good as their designers. And if their designers are building in the biases and prejudices that they personally have, then you're going to have inherently biased public services. And we're starting to see real concerns about facial recognition technology and how that's being used in some public service areas and so on. So these are big issues of public trust, as well as old-fashioned value for money. So another area where we need to make sure that we're able to keep pace with developments, we're able to audit intelligently these developments and challenge back where we see them not being well thought through. And then my final kind of area of challenge to the future audit industry, I think, is how we do our own work. So really I've been talking about what's happening in the outside world and what's happening in the environment that we're auditing. But clearly, the way we audit is already changing, and if I manage to make it to the end of the 10-year term that I've been appointed to in this job, 2029, I'm pretty sure that our audits are going to look fundamentally different in 2029 to now. Many of you have probably heard the famous quote from Bill Gates. I don't agree with everything Bill Gates said, but this one I think is really worth remembering, particularly if you've been appointed for a 10-year term, because he says, we always overestimate the amount of change that we're going to see in 2 years' time, but we always underestimate the amount of change in 10 years' time. And I'm sure that applies to audit techniques and audit methodologies. A lot of talk about data analytics, and lots of good tools on data analytics already in use, including at the NAO. A lot of talk about how we bring artificial intelligence into auditing to automate the work that at the moment takes lots of junior staff a long time to test transactions and so on. Can't we just take all of that work out analyse entire populations of transactions, do away with the need for sampling, and home in on the risky areas much more efficiently. I'm sure yes is the answer. That all of that is coming and will be there. What does that mean for future audit trainees, future young auditors like you in the room? What does it mean for how we learn our skills and become the senior auditors of the future? Will we need different skill sets from people that we recruit? Will they need to be more like data scientists and less like financial auditors? Will we need a mixture of the two? So these are really big questions for all significant audit agencies, and we're asking ourselves those questions as well. Because the one thing we know is if the auditors fall behind the skills of the people who are being audited, we're going to miss significant findings and we're going to miss significant things in the public interest. So this is a really big area for us, and another area where I'm sure cooperation between our audit agencies is going to be valuable, because none of us are the size of say PwC or KPMG. We're not global organisations with that kind of resource, so we are going to have to share our knowledge and learning intelligently here, I think, to make sure that we can not waste time on developments that are not going to give us benefit, but focus on where we can really improve our methodologies and improve our efficiency. So hopefully all of these 5 challenge areas are areas we can cooperate with each other, and as you stop being young auditors and become like me in a few decades' time, you get the benefit then of the progress we've made in keeping relevant, the theme of your conference, keeping relevant to the agenda that we're tackling, but cooperating efficiently between ourselves as we do that. So I'll stop there, and I'm very happy to open it up for questions. Thanks.